World said goodbye to Lindsey Graham in a beautiful 4-hour church service. The silver lining was that is the longest period of time Lindsey Graham had ever been in church. I want to thank you for being here to honor the life and legacy of, I just never could call him Chairman Graham. He never wanted to be called Chairman Graham. He wanted to be Lindsey's. I want to thank you for being, we have so many dignitaries, so many people famous people from television. We have so many elected officials. We have judges. And I can tell you right now, he would be looking down on us, wondering why there weren't more people here and why Governor McMaster had not already named the city of Columbia after him. Both Governor McMaster and Senator Scott put their finger on it. The reason Lindsey resonated with us is because he was us. This undersized kid who was not born with a silver spoon in his mouth, but he was born with a plastic fork in his mouth in central South Carolina. But with wit and determination and hard work, your fellow citizens will trust you to represent them. That is the story of America. It is the story of South Carolina, that we punch above our weight. This kid from central South Carolina, Darlene, whose parents y'all buried far too early, rose to be mourned by world leaders, friends with presidents, chosen by his people. This lawyer from a small upstate law firm would be responsible for picking Supreme Court justices. Lindsey Graham is a metaphor for us, for the country, for our state. Our friendship began the way all really beautiful, powerful friendships began. He endorsed my opponent when I ran for Congress the first time. I'm not kidding. I wish I was. A lot of politicians, they joke. They say, I'll do whatever helps you more. I'll endorse you or I'll endorse your opponent. Lindsey wasn't joking. He endorsed my opponent. After we narrowly eked out a victory and my wife is picking the confetti out of my pomade on election night, the very first phone call I got was from Lindsey Graham. He said, I will be the best friend that you have in Washington, D.C. And I'll be doggone then Congressman Scott if he was not. He helped us with committee assignments. He helped us navigate the waters of Washington. He never looked at us and saw a competitor. He looked at us and saw a fellow South Carolinian that needed some help. The things that man did for me that no one else could have done. He introduced me to a guy named Bono. He pronounced it Bono. He couldn't tell you a single song U2 had ever recorded or written, but he knew that I was a fan of U2, and I wanted to meet Bono. 5 different times I got to be in the room with a guy named Paul Hewson, also known as Bono, because Lindsey Graham thought enough to think about a lowly House member and invite him over to the Senate. And you know what they were talking about? It certainly wasn't about music. And it wasn't about the earrings that Bono had. They were talking about children in Africa who needed drugs, they needed medicine, and they needed food. Sometimes in this world that we find ourselves in, 99 is a failing grade. Not with Lindsey Graham. If he could find one thing that he agreed with you on, that's what he put his energies in. And with Bono, it was children in Africa. And I got to tell you this, and my colleagues will back me up, how many different times did that man say, look, this is a tough vote. I'm going to vote yes. But y'all ought to vote no. better for your political career. I'm taking some risk, and I'm going to get some flack. But you need to do what is best for you, and I am going to do what is best for my beloved state of South Carolina. And he cast some really tough votes. I never met a less pretentious person in my life than Lindsey Graham. It wasn't the trappings of office that he cared about. It was the work. And there is some bitter symmetry to the fact that it was work that he lived for, Darlene, but I am convinced that it is work that took him from us. On those long trains and this plane ride to Ukraine, not because, as the media tells us, he loved war, but because blessed are the peacemakers. People had it wrong about Lindsey Graham. Was he willing to go to war? Yes, as a last resort. Blessed are the peacemakers. He was on a trip, what turned out to be his last trip, trying to broker peace in a war where hundreds of thousands of people had lost their lives. For those D.C. reporters who believe that Lindsey lacked convictions, I can assure you he did not, because I witnessed several of them. Andrew King is here. Andrew, Richard Perry, Van Cato. I can't even call you staff. You were not staff to him. You were family to him. You were the sons that he did not have. And we endured a lot together. So far in life, the four of us have never shared a prison cell. There's still time, but we haven't done it. Not prisoners of war. But we shared a golf cart with him, and we played golf with him, and I'm not sure there's that much difference between the three. The convictions that Lindsey Graham had that come to mind immediately is he had an almost religious aversion to using what we call a rangefinder. If you are familiar with golf, it tells you what the yardage is, so you don't have to ask somebody else 15 times, how many yards do I have? He had a deeply held conviction against using hearing aids. And Sean and Ansley, he had a really deeply held conviction against the memory supplements that we sell on Fox News during commercial breaks. Because I'm just going to give you a glimpse of what playing golf with Lindsey Graham was like. So he would tee off having hit no warm-up shots whatsoever, and it would go so far left that I think geometrically it may have actually been right. I think you could walk either direction and you would find the ball at the same time. And he would say, you know, hey, Trey, go get that golf ball for me. And I would say, Chairman, I love you to death, but there's a reason my wife and I left the church we were at in Spartanburg. I don't like snakes. I am not going to look for your golf ball. And he said, well, I'll just drop one out in the fairway with you. And he said, how far do I have? 168 yards. First two times you ever said anything to Lindsey Graham were just for fun. He didn't hear him. 168 yards. How far I got? 168 yards, Chairman. 68? How did you get to be the chairman of budget? 168 yards. What do you think I ought to hit? Whatever goes 168 yards, Lindsey, I don't have any idea. I'm going to hit a pitching wedge. Well, if we were hitting off of the top of Mount Everest, yes, you should hit a pitching wedge. Lindsey, you don't hit a 168-yard pitching wedge. Times that by 18 times how many rounds of golf I was privileged to play with that man. You know, senators and federal judges have slightly different rules when it comes to golf. The first one that comes to mind is they don't pay their debts. You can tell that I don't practice law anymore because there's some judges here and they probably don't find that as funny as I do. But Lindsey was turning over a new leaf. I played about a month ago with a guy named John Ratcliffe, who's our CIA director, and Johnny and I somehow managed to eke out like a 6-up victory over Lindsey and his partner, and Lindsey decided to pay. So he brings out this crumpled up probably counterfeit $20 bill out of his pocket, and he hands it to John Ratcliffe. Ratcliffe's on a government salary. He took it. I handed it back to him. I said, look, Fox is great to me. Plus, Lindsey, honestly, that would buy you 2 brand new suits. You need to keep that $20 bill. He told me he was going to run for president. Scott, my reaction was not unlike yours, but I said, let me hear you out. And he said, well, you tell me, what do I need to do to be more competitive in a presidential race? And I said, you need to get married, Senator Graham. And he said, well, there's some things I'm just not willing to do, Trey, even if it means not being the president of the United States. And I don't know if y'all knew this or not. I mean, the media never talks about it. Lindsey actually wasn't married. Did y'all know that? The media never brings that up, but they never get right why he was never married. I know why he was never married. I sat through a wedding ceremony with him. I know why he was not married. I sat through their wedding ceremony with Lindsey Graham. He shows up at the church, Seacoast in Charleston. He asked my wife and I to wait on him because he was running just a tad bit late. He showed up in cargo pants and a shirt, like a T-shirt. And my wife, who's the sweetest human being on the face of the earth, said, you know, Chairman Graham, would you like us to wait while you change? And he said, change what? I mean, you can barely see the stains. No, I can't see the stains, Lindsey, but I can see the Dale Earnhardt logo on your shirt. Well, he wasn't going to go change, so we finally work our way in there to the beautiful wedding of Tim and Mindy Scott, and it was gorgeous. It was a beautiful wedding. But you cannot see 2 deaf people beside each other at a wedding. So my wife figured that out, and she sat in between us, which was a tragic mistake in hindsight. So for those who are wondering why Lindsey Graham was never married, there's not a chance in the world that he would have made it through the wedding vows, because he didn't make it through Tim and Mindy's. When the pastor got to for better or worse, Lindsey whispered to me like an F5 tornado, like, how sick are we talking about? You mean like seasonal allergies? You mean a cold? And my wife's trying to get us both to calm down, and then they get to for richer, for poorer, and you can imagine what his reaction to that was. Tim, don't do it. Negotiate. Let me go start another gang up in Washington and get you a better deal. So you have no idea how hard it is to get kicked out of a wedding, but we managed to do it. He loved, I cannot use the word staff. I cannot. Y'all have been so amazing the last 2 weeks. Darlene, you have one of the best group of people that's ever been assembled in South Carolina and Washington. I cannot call them staff. They were family to him. And old Richard Perry, God bless him, he's been with Lindsey since the earth cooled. And how many difficult conversations has Richard had? You know, the first time Lindsey ran for Senate, he sat Richard down and said, Richard, 31% of the people in this state are not going to vote for me no matter what. You don't need to worry about it. Don't even try. Richard's sitting there scratching his head thinking, well, I mean, we can try, can't we? I mean, do you have to give up on 31%? Don't worry about it. 6 years later, Lindsey's running for re-election. He says, Richard, 42% of the people in this state are not going to vote for me no matter what. Well, Richard's a smart guy. He sees things are not going in the right direction. And then this last go around, Lindsey said, Richard, 49% of the people in this state are not going to vote for me no matter what. That man had incredible self-awareness. He knew who he was. Tim and I looked at polls, and we see that we're like double-digit disapproval, and we're on the phone with our therapist. Lindsey sees 55-45, and he thinks he's got 5 points to play with. Was he high profile? Yes. He just never acted like it. He treated the boys that parked the golf carts, exactly the same as he did the men who owned the golf course. I walked through a lot of airports with Lindsey Graham. He never failed to stop to thank someone in uniform. And for a man that did not have biological children, he sure followed the teachings of another famous man who did not have biological children by the name of Jesus. I'm on a driving range with Van Cato, and I hear Lindsey talking in a voice that I have never heard him talk in before. It was sympathetic, empathetic, and I think, what has happened to my friend? And Van politely tells me he is talking to a child who's getting ready to have surgery. And he was speaking like he was the parent of 12 children. Lindsey Graham was the least pretentious person I have ever seen in politics. You know, I should listen to my wife. She said, let that one go, Trey. I can't do it, honey. I'm sorry. Yes, Tim Scott had a prayer breakfast. And there for a while, I mean, back when I was there wasn't any talk about your personal sex life at the prayer breakfast. That came later after I left. So Lindsey was sometimes, that's not true. Lindsey was always late. It wasn't sometimes late, he was always late. And Tim had just finished a beautiful sermon, and I was so lucky I had two senators that quoted the Bible. One of them got it right, and one of them wasn't even close. So Tim asked us to share our favorite Bible verse, and Lindsey stood up there and shared his, and I whispered to Tim, that's actually a line from the movie Gladiator. That's not a Bible verse, but, and then that small county lawyer wowed the jury like I've never seen a preacher do, with the authenticity, the sincerity of his message, the humility of his message. He did more for the cause of Christ without being able to cite a Bible verse, just with the authentic way that he presented his relationship with Christ. You know, there are a few things in life less relevant than a former member of Congress. And you do wonder, is anybody going to return these telephone calls? Anybody ever going to call you? When you leave, you go through a period where you just question your relevance. My two senators would not allow that to happen. That man will preach my funeral. And Lindsey Graham spent more time with me after I left the House than when I was his colleague in the House. He took me on trips with him. He took me to see the President of the United States with him. I played more golf with him when I was a non-member of anything than I ever did when I was actually in a position where I could help him. To my friends in the media, or to those on social media, and boy, if I could go back in time and change one thing, I would never have got Lindsey an iPhone. I would have kept that flip phone, and whoever taught him how to use X, there's a special place in purgatory for you. I got to tell to all of Lindsey Graham's critics, he never hated you back. If your goal was for him to treat you the way that some people treated him, you failed. He was the worst at carrying a grudge. I had to keep a list of who we were mad at because he could not remember who had done what. And what speaks to the love and the forgiveness of Christ more than not carrying a grudge? I saw him cry one time. I saw him get teary-eyed one time, and I saw him cry one time. Darlene, he cried at his retirement ceremony from the Air Force because he loved wearing the uniform of his country. He felt like he was part of something. He had a camaraderie, esprit de corps. He had brothers. And Darlene, I saw him get misty-eyed almost every time your name came up, and you don't doubt that he loved you, but I will tell you, even before I really got to know you, I knew one thing about Lindsey Graham, that he loved his baby sister. We were on the 16th tee box at the Country Club of Spartanburg, and I saw Lindsey running back. Well, that's not true. I saw Lindsey jogging back. Let me get this right. He was briskly walking back to the 15th green because he had forgotten something. And I thought it was the quarter that he marked his ball with, because that could get him to move pretty quick, but that's not what it was. He had forgotten the putter that your father gave him. And he came back to the 16th tee box, and I'm standing there, Larry, with my son, and he says, and he was misty-eyed, "There are three things that matter to me in my life. This putter, because my father gave it to me. The class ring that my mama bought for me. And my baby sister, Darlene." And that was it. Larry, he liked you as much as any brother can like someone who marries their baby sister. That's the nicest way I can put it for you. If only I had known that July 3rd, when our son and you and Lindsey and I played that round of golf, that it would be the last time I would ever see. If only I'd known. But we don't know, and that's kind of the point, isn't it? That's what Lindsey would tell us. Folks, I was talking to Sean Hannity, and Sean said, "What do you think Lindsey would say if he was speaking at our service?" And I said, "Well, Sean, they'd have to beam him in from Saudi Arabia. He wouldn't be at our service. Are you kidding me?" But if he were to be beamed in, he would say, "Those flowers are beautiful. I would love to have seen them when I still could. Send the flowers when people can see them." And he would be so overwhelmed with the outpouring of love that has been visited upon him and his legacy and his family over the last 2 weeks. He'd be overwhelmed. But my heart breaks because he didn't get to hear more of it when he actually could have heard it. So what Lindsey would say is, send flowers to people when they can still smell them. And tell people you love them when they can still hear you. Last thing he said to me, "Larry, you were in the parking lot, I was in the parking lot." He just was with one of my children, but he said, "Tell the other child, Abigail, hello. Tell Terry hello." He loved my wife. He loved my wife. "And I will call you when I get home." That's the last word that crossed his lips to me, was home. Lindsey, you are home. Literally, figuratively, you are back in your beloved South Carolina, and you will soon be laid to rest in your hometown. You know, in conclusion, Lindsey was fascinated with life after Congress, probably because he knew he would never experience it. He would be walking the halls of the Senate until he was taken home by the Lord. So he was fascinated, Sean, that people would pay us to read a teleprompter. He was fascinated that people would actually pay to hear the same boring speech that we gave for free when we were members of Congress. So we spent a lot of time talking about what life after Congress was like, because he never would have gotten to experience it. And he knew this. I gave 95 speeches. I've given 95 speeches since I left. Different states, different groups, different topics. One common denominator. Started every one of them with a joke about Lindsey Graham. You only pick on people that you love, so I wanted there to be no doubt that I love that man. So I won't tell the joke, but I will never tell it again. I will give you a glimpse, and then we will draw this to an end. I tell this joke about 3 of my friends going to heaven and violating the rules of heaven. John Boehner was one of them. He broke into a CVS and stole some cigarettes and some self-tanning lotion, and he was chained to Roseanne Barr. And then I said Marco Rubio violated the rules of heaven. He broke into Mary Magdalene's apartment to steal some high-heel boots in case he ever ran for president again. And he was chained to Richard Simmons with a 3-foot-long chain. And then the punchline is, and then I see my friend Lindsey Graham, and he's chained to Cindy Crawford. And in a voice as loud as thunder, I hear, Cindy Crawford, you have violated the rules of heaven, and this is your punishment for all of eternity. And I never once had that joke not work. And I will never again tell it. Because he's not chained to anybody. He is in the arms of his Lord and Savior. He is surrounded by the love of his parents, darling. And he is home. He is home. Lindsey, I loved you. You made me laugh. You made me think. Maybe you want to jump out of airplanes. You got me fined by the FCC when you came on my show. And you have made me cry a lot over the last 2 weeks. But I want you to know, brother, that your name will echo through the halls of history. In your state, in your country, they loved you. In your family and your friends, they loved you. And I wish you could have been here to listen to how much people loved and respected you. I will do what you would have wanted me to do, which is take care of your sister. That is all you would have asked me to do. Take care of your sister. And that is what I will do. And then one day I will see you again, and we can laugh and we can fight. And we'll do it forever and all of eternity. And until that day, I will miss you with my whole heart. God bless you, brother.
Thank you, choir. Steve, the orchestra, magnificent as always. Darlene, I've prayed for you every night since your brother died. And I watched the service at the Rotunda yesterday. I was amazed by the strength and the grace that God gave to you. I'm very proud of you. When Senator Graham died, the world lost a friend, but we lost a member of the family. He loved South Carolina. You've heard that repeatedly these last several days. He told me not long ago, he said, you know, I think I'm old enough now and experienced enough now that I can be a good senator for the people. And that's what he wanted. He wanted to represent well the people of the state that he loved. After his death, I remember reading several different articles. And one of the things that caught my attention is that it said that his net worth was $1.4 million. I read that and I thought, that must not be right. I read it again and it said the same thing, $1.4 million. And I thought, he's been up there for 30 years. What's he been doing? I mean, I know other people have gone to Washington, and after they're there for a while, they have $20, $30, $50 million. Maybe he should have taken a course at Darla Moore's School of Business. But see, that was Senator Graham. It was never about him. It was about us. He didn't go to Washington to enrich himself. He went to Washington to make life better and safer for us and for America. He loved this state, and we lost a brother. As Trey said just a moment ago, he was a peacemaker. There's a difference between a peace lover and a peacemaker. A peace lover cherishes peace, but a peacemaker works to make peace. He was serious, but he had a wonderful sense of humor. I remember early in my ministry, I began to notice that the people who influenced my life most were older pastors, older preachers. And I began to wonder, why is that? Why the older pastors rather than my contemporaries? And this is my conclusion. The older pastors seem to take the gospel seriously, but not themselves. And that was Senator Graham. He took his work seriously, but not himself. He called me one day when I was pastor of this church and said, Wendell, do you want to play golf at Augusta National? Well, I'd given up on that idea long ago. I said, are you serious? He said, yeah, I'm serious. You want to play? And I said, you tell me the date and the time and I'll be there. He said, well, I'm looking at Easter Sunday. I thought about it for a minute or two, and I said, I think I can work it out. We did play. It wasn't on Easter, thankfully. I have some deacons that didn't play golf, and they probably wouldn't understand that. We did play. It just wasn't on Easter Sunday. When we received news that he had passed, we were shocked. We didn't understand it. I mean, what just happened? We weren't expecting that. You know, when I was young, I thought for every question there was an answer, and I normally had the answers to the questions. As I got older, I began to realize there are a lot of questions to which there are no easy answers. Solomon was the wisest man in the world, but he was not omniscient. There were things that he didn't know, he didn't understand. David didn't understand the prosperity of the wicked and the suffering of good people. And he said in Psalm 73, behold, these are the wicked and always at ease. They have increased in wealth. Surely in vain I have kept my heart pure and washed my hands in innocence. We have questions when death comes to those we love. My dad died at 43, and I didn't understand it. He was a good man. He knew God. He was a deacon in the church. He loved my mother. He was a good father. I didn't understand it. I still don't. There are questions to which we have no answers. We don't really understand the senator's passing at such a young age. Wasn't expected. He was here a couple of weeks before he died at Celebration of Liberty. And we were talking. I said, Senator, you look great. You've lost weight. You really look good. And he said, I'm getting ready for the next 6 years. He wasn't expecting to be here like this. Death comes and we don't always have the answers as to why. What I hope to do today, and I'm going to do it as briefly as I can, what I hope to do today is to encourage you from the Word of God. And the passage of Scripture I'm going to read is Isaiah chapter 6, beginning in verse 1. In the year that Uzziah died, I saw the Lord seated on a high and lofty throne, and his robe filled the temple. Seraphim were standing above him. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. His glory fills the whole earth. I'm going to refer to 8 verses, and in those 8 verses, there are 3 actions. Isaiah said, I saw, I said, I heard. First of all, he said, I saw the Lord sitting on the throne. This was a devastating time for the people of Judah. Uzziah the king had died. They were desperate. They didn't know what the future held for them. They didn't know what was going to happen in Judah. So they were desperate. That was the thing that drove Isaiah to the temple. And he said when he was there, he said, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne. The word for Lord that is used there is not Yahweh, which speaks of his essence. It is Adonai, which speaks of his dominion. He is saying, I saw the Lord who is sovereign, the sovereign God. That's a good word for us, because there's a sense in which we are a little bit confused. We're not sure. And we need to see again a sovereign God. You see, when sickness looms, he's sitting on his throne. When fear threatens us, he is on the throne. When doubt questions us, he is on the throne. And when death comes, he is on the throne. I think the Apostle Paul understood that, because when Paul was facing the executioner, he wrote to Timothy and he said, Timothy, the time of my departure is at hand. I fought a good fight, kept the faith, finished my course. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me at that day, but not to me only, to all those who love his appearing. He said, Timothy, the time of my departure has come. The word departure is a military word. The Army used it to refer to breaking camp and moving to another location. The Navy used it to refer to hoisting anchorage, setting sail. In other words, they understood the word departure to mean going from one place to another. That is the way that the Apostle Paul understood death. It is going from one place to another place. He saw the sovereign Lord. When Isaiah saw God, he was sitting on a throne. He is sovereign. He is majestic. He said he was lofty, higher than all others. He is exalted, greater than all others. He is holy, holy, holy. Ladies and gentlemen, it seems to me, and probably to many of you, that in many respects, the world is upside down today. Evil is called good. Good is called evil. Black is called white. White is called black. It is upside down today. And in that circumstance, we sometimes become discouraged, thinking that all is lost. There is no hope. And we desperately need to see a sovereign God again. I pray every night I have for some time, Lord, remove the scales from my eyes, that I don't just see the garbage that is out there, but help me see the Lord sitting on a throne, because he is sovereign. Isaiah said, I saw. Secondly, he said, I said. Then I said, woe is me, for I am ruined, because I'm a man of unclean lips, and live among a people of unclean lips, and because my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Isaiah saw God, and then he saw himself, and he said, woe is me. Isaiah was not prideful because of his vision. He was humble because he saw his sinfulness. Senator Graham walked the halls of this world's power, but he never forgot who he was. He was a boy from South Carolina who grew up in a pool hall, and that gave him a humility that was attractive to all of us. Isaiah said, woe is me, and then he saw his sinfulness. He said, I'm a man of unclean lips. Matthew Henry wrote, those are fittest to be employed for God, who are low in their own eyes and are made deeply sensible of their own weakness and unworthiness. Senator Graham knew and confessed his sinfulness. He knew his need. And then the holy God, Isaiah said, cleanses us. Verse 6. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, and in his hand was a glowing coal that he had taken from the altar with tongs. He touched my mouth with it and said, now that this has touched your lips, your wickedness is removed, and your sin is atoned for. Senator Graham did not always know the language of the church, but I believe he knew the Lord. He confessed that, and his actions confirmed that. He was a tireless fighter for the unborn. He fought for peace. He fought for justice. He fought for Christian values. But you know what troubles me most? Those people who know the language of the church, and because they know the language, they convince us they know the Lord, when their actions testify that they do not. I believe that he knew the Lord, but not always our language. Third, I heard. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, who should I send? Who will go for us? I said, here am I, send me. The Lord said, who will go for us? And Isaiah said, here am I, send me. I think Senator Graham heard that voice, who will go for us? And he said, here am I, send me. He traveled the world on a quest for peace. How many times was he in the Middle East? 10 times in Ukraine, just came back from a successful mission. He heard the voice of God. Who will go for us? Here am I, send me. But ladies and gentlemen, after the Lord tells us to go, there's a time when he tells us to come. Senator Graham went, and then he went home to heaven. You know, all of us are going to end up in heaven or hell. I don't know. I'm curious about heaven. I know some about it because of what I read. The Bible says it's a place of beauty, more beautiful than Senator Graham's beloved South Carolina, streets of gold, gates of pearl, place of service. The Bible says his servants shall serve him. I used to hear about heaven, and I thought, I'm going to be bored to death up there. I mean, sitting on a cloud trying to keep my robe straight, my halo on, and all that stuff. And then I read that verse. It says that his servants shall serve him. I believe we're going to be productive when we get to heaven. I'm not sure what we'll do, but I believe we'll be productive. Is it a place of sinlessness? There's none there. Place of peace. The Bible says he shall wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall no longer be any death. There shall no longer be any mourning, crying, pain. First things have passed away. Place of reunion. We will see again those who know the Lord if we know the Lord. I believe, and I do, I believe I'll see my mother, my dad again, my brother, my sister, our senator. I believe that we will be reunited. Will we know each other? We're not going to have less sense up there than we do down here, so yes, we're going to know each other when we get there. Let me close with this. I read this some time ago, and it's always been meaningful to me because it is a description of death that pictures it for me, and perhaps it will for you. I'm standing upon the seashore. A ship at my side spreads her white sails in the morning breeze and starts for the blue ocean. She is an object of beauty and strength, and I stand and watch her until at length she is only a ribbon or a white cloud just where the sea and the sky come to mingle with each other. Then someone at my side says, "There, she's gone." She's gone where? Gone from my sight, that's all. She is just as large in mast and hull and spar as she was when she left my side, and just as able to bear her load of living freight to the place of destination. Her diminished size is in me, not in her. And just at the moment when someone at my side says, "There, she's gone," there are other voices ready to take up the glad shout, "There she comes," and that is dying. Senator Graham is gone from our shore, but he has been welcomed on heaven's shore. Our gracious Father, we thank you for the promise in Jesus Christ that those who know him will be forever with you, and we will be reunited with those loved ones in Christ. Lord, I pray for Darlene and the family. I pray that you will comfort them, give them peace, and bless them. And I thank you, Father, for the friendship, for the life of Senator Graham. He was a blessing to us. Father, thank you for these who have come to pay their respects. I pray you'll bless them in Jesus' name. Amen.
When South Carolina ETV and South Carolina Public Radio to bring you live special broadcast coverage of the late Senator Lindsey Graham's funeral service here at the State House in Columbia. And I'm here with the University of South Carolina political science professor Kirk Randazzo. We'll be bringing you some analysis and commentary over the coming hours as we look at the life and legacy of the late Senator Lindsey Graham as we honor him today. Day 2 of these funeral services for the late senator who passed away on July 11th. Now, flags are flying here at half staff and across the state as well, as they have been since shortly after we lost Senator Graham on July 11th. They were also lowered nationwide through July 18th. And like I said, we'll be bringing you special coverage over the next several hours of the late senator's final journey home here following those memorial services yesterday in Washington, including in the Capitol Rotunda and at the Washington National Cathedral. But today we are here in Columbia, and in just a few moments we expect to see the South Carolina State Guard bring out the casket on the caisson with the senator's remains here and emerge from the State House grounds on the north steps of the State House. You can hear a lot of buzzing going on right now. There's a lot of activity going on right now as we await to see the caisson coming out here on the north side of the State House. And of course, there'll be an honor guard there as well. You can see the flags there flying at half staff over the State House on this sunny, warm July day. A lot of folks have turned out, including many media outlets here, to honor the late senator as we see a very special day, a very long ceremonial day. A lot of crowds are forming here today to see the final journey for the senator who served South Carolina for 71 years, of course. And we'll have more details, of course, on that journey shortly. We'll have that special service there at First Baptist Church in Columbia at noon. But before then, we will have a flyover of F-16s from McEntire Joint National Guard Base there in Sumter, the 169th Fighter Wing from McEntire. Those F-16s will be flying over the State House here shortly. We expect that around 11 o'clock. We expect to see the senator's remains coming out shortly as well. There's a small crowd gathered out here. They'll be waiting there for that before they process down Main Street to First Baptist Church for that noon service. And between them, we'll be talking about what's going on and all those things that we'll be watching today. We'll be following the caisson down the street as well as its arrival at First Baptist, where we'll have a special program feed for you as well. Everything that happens today as we provide you this coverage on South Carolina ETV and South Carolina Public Radio. Now, while we're filling some time here before we see the casket come out here, I just want to mention that I was in Washington yesterday on Tuesday for that service at the Washington National Cathedral. That was before a brief service inside the Capitol Rotunda, like we said, to honor the senator's service there. He was in Congress from 1994 to 2002, when he also became the senator in 2002, replacing Senator Strom Thurmond in that wide open race there. And he has served consecutively since, and he was on the way to a 5th term. He got that nomination in June, winning his primary outright again, like he has in the past, and was ready to face down Dr. Annie Inges, the Democrat, in November. We'll be talking more about potentially what this means for that race going forward. But of course, we're here to really talk about the life and legacy of the late senator as we wait to see the casket come out front here at the State House on the North grounds. And of course, during those moments yesterday, which we had coverage of, you saw the vice president talking. J.D. Vance was there at the Capitol Rotunda. There, saw Majority Leader John Thune at the Capitol, and then we also had President Donald Trump at the Washington National Cathedral later. But I'll talk about what we saw at the National Cathedral briefly. But you were watching, Kirk, and you were seeing what was happening in the Rotunda. It was a very monumental moment. This is not a service that happens to just anyone. I mean, my gosh, to have such honors both at the Rotunda and then at the Washington National Cathedral for someone like this who's been described as a giant.
Yeah, I think that's important to stress right off the bat, that a service at the Rotunda is incredibly rare. And in fact, the last time there was a service for a senator who died in office was John McCain in 2018, one of Lindsey Graham's best friends. So to have this service for Senator Graham in the Rotunda as well, I think very much speaks to the impact he had on the Senate as an institution, not just South Carolina or politics across the United States.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we'll be talking more about what we saw yesterday and what we'll be seeing today as well as we wait for the South Carolina State Guard caisson detachment here to emerge.
As we prepare to conclude the service, I would ask that you remain at your seats until the minister of music has dismissed you. Following the benediction, the family is going to recess behind the casket, after which the honor guard will prepare to escort Senator Graham's remains from the sanctuary to street level. And once the family has exited the sanctuary down to the cars behind the casket, you'll be dismissed. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for your continued prayers for Darlene, for Senator Graham's family and his staff, and all those who will mourn in the days ahead. Now receive this blessing from the word of the Lord. The Lord will protect you from all evil. He will keep your soul. The Lord will guard your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forever. And the peace of God, which surpasses all comprehension, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Amen.
if you would be seated, they've asked us please to do that, as Pastor West said, and they'll give me a signal when all is clear in just a moment. So if everyone would please remain seated and not leave the building yet, that's what the family and have asked us to do.
This is SCE TV's Gavin Jackson coming to you from the South Carolina State House, and you're watching images of the conclusion of the late Senator Lindsey Graham's service there at First Baptist Church in downtown Columbia. We've been watching this, and I'm going to give you this moment now just for our listeners on radio. His casket is being escorted out of the church. That military honor guard. We're going to watch this right now. Come back in right now here as we watch the final images as the conclusion of Senator Lindsey Graham's celebration of life service at First Baptist Church in downtown Columbia. It was roughly a 2-hour-long service that started at noon and has just concluded. And we're going to be with you just for a few more moments here. I'm with USC political science professor Kirk Randazzo on the State House grounds where today's events began. Kirk, a powerful service to honor a powerful man, but a man that many folks said didn't take himself too seriously, but he was very serious in what he did. We heard from the governor, we heard from Senator Tim Scott, who he's worked with, and the former Congressman Trey Gowdy with a powerful eulogy right there. Tell me some of your takeaways from that 2-hour-long service today.
Yeah, I think for all of the speakers, they commented on stories about Lindsey Graham as an individual, not necessarily as a senator. They still kind of remembered what he had done for the state, certainly what he had done for the country. But we got a lot of stories, a glimpse on sort of the inner Lindsey Graham that most people just don't see. This is not, the part that is portrayed on most TV stations, certainly newscasts. And I think what stood out for me maybe most poignantly was Trey Gowdy's comments. It was very heartfelt. You could feel the love that Gowdy had for Graham, the moments that they shared, the depth of emotion that overtook him towards the end. And I think it was a very good reminder for all of us about the person that Lindsey Graham was, the individual, his character, and how he never forgot sort of his roots, his upbringing, and that carried with him throughout his entire life.
Yeah, it was an incredibly powerful eulogy there too. You know, it was a true eulogy that you want to see, with that almost a roller coaster of emotion. He would take you to these very funny moments on the golf course and these stories, and then he would just talk about how he felt about the man, for being there, for being his friend for so long, and even some anecdotes when he first got into Congress there, and how they might have been against each other in the beginning, but immediately when Trey Gowdy won his seat, Graham was the first call to him saying, hey, I'm going to be your best friend in D.C. I'm going to help you navigate this place and help you understand this place. And that stuck with Trey Gowdy. And again, that's a hallmark of what we've been talking about today and throughout these days, talking about Senator Graham and his life and his ability to work with people, especially fellow South Carolinians, to make sure that they all deliver for the state, because that's what they're there to do.
Yeah, and you heard a moment from Representative Jim Clyburn. Mm-hmm. So, a Democrat within the state, again, someone who had served decades in public service. He and Lindsey Graham had built a tremendous friendship over the years, and to see Jim Clyburn step up and read an aspect, read the Lord's Prayer, was also a powerful moment to remind us that throughout these partisan fights, you still have individuals doing what they think is best for the people whom they serve.
And of course, we heard from the governor too, who told several funny stories, as he's known to do. But one also impactful story about when Senator Graham was during the inauguration ceremony here. I guess that was in 2003, because he was talking about how Governor Mark Sanford was sworn in that year, same year that Governor McMaster was also sworn in as Attorney General. Senator Graham had been sworn in Washington before coming here, but of course, when they're having the ceremony on the south side of the State House here, all the dignitaries, all the big names, all the important folks are coming down the stairs that are announced. And the governor was recounting the time when then Senior Senator Fritz Hollings, the Democrat at the time, was announced, got some light applause, and then the new Republican Senator Lindsey Graham was announced, and it was more of a swelling of applause, more of an energetic moment. And that's when Senator Graham reached over and grabbed Senator Hollings' hands and held it up in the air, and he said few men would do that. And it just spoke to his character and that ability to work together that we've been continuing to talk about all day.
Yeah, and I think that was a way for Lindsey Graham to both showcase but also thank Fritz Hollings for taking Lindsey under his wing very early on. We had mentioned that before the ceremony at First Baptist, how Fritz Hollings very much was a mentor to Lindsey Graham, and Lindsey very visibly wanted to demonstrate his gratitude in the State House in that moment to remind people that, hey, we are in this together regardless of party.
And we're here at the State House grounds, but you can see on your television screens, if you're watching online as well, there is a procession getting ready to get underway, an escort of Senator Graham's remains. He'll be heading to the upstate for a family burial. He'll be leaving downtown Columbia very shortly. There you see several officers on their bikes, motorcycles, and they'll be escorting him out and up to the upstate for his final resting place back home in the upstate region. And of course, as we wait for that to move and continue to talk about the ceremony that lasted close to 2 hours, we also talk about Senator Tim Scott, who has served in the Senate with Graham since 2013. And he just talked about just how Senator Graham would show up and show out, and he's going to miss my friend Lindsey Graham, senator to world leader and statesman. I mean, not every senator is a world leader, Kirk. I mean, it's like, and again, we've been talking about as well what we saw at Washington National Cathedral yesterday in the Rotunda. He affected so many lives and was so connected to so many things.
Yeah, and not only the world leader part, and as you said, Benjamin Netanyahu, Volodymyr Zelensky, they came to Washington yesterday to pay tribute to Lindsey Graham, but also somebody who made sure to be supportive and go out of their way to help friends. So Tim Scott had the story about his prayer breakfast at 8:30 in the morning, then commenting how he didn't know Lindsey Graham was not a morning person, and joked how the senator was like, well, couldn't you make it a prayer lunch, or better yet, a prayer dinner? But even though Scott said, well, it's already booked, I need you there at 8:30, Lindsey Graham showed up every single time, despite the fact that that wasn't his best time of day to do anything.
And the governor also continued to share some stories, even from the 2008 campaign trail, Senator John McCain, who was the Republican nominee at the time, and also very close friend, mentor of Senator Graham, and how the three of them were on a campaign bus. And who would have thought the governor was going to bring up Borat, the comedian there, Sacha Baron Cohen, and Senator Graham's impression of him, which has a very distinct voice. I've never heard that. I don't know many people that have heard that story. But I can only imagine how hysterical it was. And to that effect, the governor did mention how Senator McCain was literally just rolling with laughter at the time.
Yeah, that story surprised me as well. And, you know, given sort of the partisan nature of Sacha Baron Cohen's sort of comedy, certainly the character Borat, I can only imagine Lindsey Graham doing an impersonation. I think I would be rolling on the floor as well. And I could see where that moment stuck in the governor's mind. And I'm glad he told that story to everybody, because, again, I think that's a side of the person that Lindsey Graham was that we often just don't see, because we don't get past the senator. We don't get the official role to see kind of the individual underneath.
And yeah, we were talking about those stories from the governor, and he shares this other one too when he's talking about trying to get one of those technology innovation hubs, an energy innovation hub here in the state, competing with other states for this, and how it was a full frontal effort, full offensive effort by not just him, but Graham and Clyburn, in trying to lobby Washington for one of these innovation hubs to research, you know, energy innovation and things like that. And here's just one example. He was also talking about, we were talking about Savannah Riverside. He had a story about that and how passionate Graham was about making sure that that stuck around too. So all these things that, again, like, you hear about, but until it gets done, we see the press release, but how it gets done is what we're learning about in these anecdotes and these stories. And of course, we've picked up on them over the years, but to hear them like that, you're like, wow, like, this is what politics is. It's relationships. It's making it work. And if you don't have that, then what do you have?
Yeah, and the story from the governor about the Department of Energy grant, how he commented that then Secretary Raimondo under the Biden administration mentioned to them how this was the first time she had a bipartisan conversation, because it was McMaster, it was Graham, it was Clyburn, and that was something that stuck out to her. And McMaster's response was, well, that's just how we do things in South Carolina. Again, I think that often gets lost, and especially in a state that is so dominated by one party, we tend to forget very easily that officials, regardless of party, come together to make sure the state of South Carolina is not forgotten and that the people are not forgotten. And I thought that was just a fantastic tale.
And Kirk, to put a button on that, I think that's exactly the message that anyone who's seeking to succeed Senator Graham is picking up on today. Obviously, like we've heard from so many people, there was no replacing this man. He's an original, but to see what you do as a senator and how it defines your career, it comes down to what you deliver to the state, to the people that elected you there.
And I think it will be curious going forward, and only time will tell, but in an era of hyper-partisanship in Washington, D.C., to sort of fulfill the shoes that Lindsey Graham had when he first started was one to buck the system. And is that potentially an opening for his successor, whoever it might be, to move us back to an era of bipartisanship and maybe lower the temperature a little bit, turn down the dial for all of the political anger and rancor and all the animosity.
Yes.
And remember, at the end of the day, we need to work together to get things done.
And Kirk, with that, we're seeing the motorcade rolling now, the hearse carrying the late Senator Graham's remains, escorting him up to the upstate out of downtown Columbia from First Baptist Church, where we just saw that service take place for just about 2 hours there, really capping the second day of remembrances for the late Senator Lindsey Graham, who died on July 11th, 2 days after turning 71, as he was looking to get reelected to a fifth term, serving in the US Senate representing South Carolina, something that he's done since 2002 after several years in the US House, and of course a brief stint here at the State House. Son of South Carolina, as the governor called him, a true South Carolinian. High praise from everyone that has spoken about him during this time. Of course, a difficult moment for the state. It was a very tragic and sudden loss of the senator due to a heart condition that took place on July 11th there too. But again, a lot of people showing up and showing out for the senator today, including we did see Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent there in the front row, along with Tim Scott, James Clyburn, and the governor and First Lady. And with that, we are concluding our coverage here, Kirk. I want to really thank you for being here with us today for this monumental, this historic event, covering the life and legacy of the late Senator Lindsey Graham, who left us on July 11th, 2026 here. And with that, Scott, Kirk, any final words you want to put a button on that today?
No, I just think, probably the best way to close this out is that we had this moment of unity right now where people came together to remember someone. And if that moment can continue, I think that will also be a testimony to Graham's legacy.
Of course, this is the conclusion of the celebration of life for the late Senator Lindsey Graham, but in the coming days and weeks, we'll be following the succession for that position as the Republican nomination race will continue. We'll bring you that coverage going forward. For South Carolina ETV, I am Gavin Jackson with USC Professor Kirk Randazzo. For our entire team here at ETV and Public Radio, Jackson here, and we're breaking into our regular programming on South Carolina ETV and South Carolina Public Radio to bring you live special broadcast coverage of the late Senator Lindsey Graham's funeral service here at the State House in Columbia. And I'm here with the University of South Carolina political science professor Kirk Randazzo. We'll be bringing you some analysis and commentary over the coming hours as we look at the life and legacy of the late Senator Lindsey Graham as we honor him today. Day 2 of these funeral services for the late senator who passed away on July 11th. Now, flags are flying here at half staff and across the state as well, as they have been since shortly after we lost Senator Graham on July 11th. They were also lowered nationwide through July 18th. And like I said, we'll be bringing you special coverage over the next several hours of the late senator's final journey home here following those memorial services yesterday in Washington, including in the Capitol Rotunda and at the Washington National Cathedral. But today we are here in Columbia, and in just a few moments we expect to see the South Carolina State Guard bring out the casket on the caisson with the senator's remains here and emerge from the State House grounds on the north steps of the State House. You can hear a lot of buzzing going on right now. There's a lot of activity going on right now as we await to see the caisson coming out here on the north side of the State House. And of course, there'll be an honor guard there as well. You can see the flags there flying at half staff over the State House on this sunny, warm July day. A lot of folks have turned out, including many media outlets here, to honor the late senator as we see a very special day, a very long ceremonial day. A lot of crowds are forming here today to see the final journey for the senator who served South Carolina for 71 years, of course. And we'll have more details, of course, on that journey shortly. We'll have that special service there at First Baptist Church in Columbia at noon. But before then, we will have a flyover of F-16s from McEntire Joint National Guard Base there in Sumter, the 169th Fighter Wing from McEntire. Those F-16s will be flying over the State House here shortly. We expect that around 11 o'clock. We expect to see the senator's remains coming out shortly as well. There's a small crowd gathered out here. They'll be waiting there for that before they process down Main Street to First Baptist Church for that noon service. And between them, we'll be talking about what's going on and all those things that we'll be watching today. We'll be following the caisson down the street as well as its arrival at First Baptist, where we'll have a special program feed for you as well. Everything that happens today as we provide you this coverage on South Carolina ETV and South Carolina Public Radio. Now, while we're filling some time here before we see the casket come out here, I just want to mention that I was in Washington yesterday on Tuesday for that service at the Washington National Cathedral. That was before a brief service inside the Capitol Rotunda, like we said, to honor the senator's service there. He was in Congress from 1994 to 2002, when he also became the senator in 2002, replacing Senator Strom Thurmond in that wide open race there. And he has served consecutively since, and he was on the way to a 5th term. He got that nomination in June, winning his primary outright again like he has in the past, and was ready to face down Dr. Annie Inges, the Democrat, in November. We'll be talking more about potentially what this means for that race going forward. But of course, we're here to really talk about the life and legacy of the late senator as we wait to see the casket come out front here at the State House on the North grounds. And of course, during those moments yesterday, which we had coverage of, you saw the vice president talking. J.D. Vance was there at the Capitol Rotunda there, Kirk. We also saw Majority Leader John Thune at the Capitol. And then we also had President Donald Trump at the Washington National Cathedral later. But I'll talk about what we saw at the National Cathedral briefly. But you were watching, Kirk, and you you were seeing what was happening in the Rotunda, it was a very monumental moment. This is not a service that happens to just anyone. I mean, my gosh, to have such honors both at the Rotunda and then at the Washington National Cathedral for someone like this, who's been described as a giant.
Yeah, I think that's important to stress right off the bat, that a service at the Rotunda is incredibly rare. And in fact, the last time there was a service for a senator who died in office was John McCain in 2018, one of Lindsey Graham's best friends. So to have this service for Senator Graham in the Rotunda as well, I think very much speaks to the impact he had on the Senate as an institution, not just South Carolina or politics across the United States.
And of course, we'll be talking more about what we saw yesterday and what we'll be seeing today as well, as we wait for the South Carolina State Guard caisson detachment here to emerge on the north steps with the casket of the late senator, and we expect to fly over at 11 o'clock too. So just so our viewers and our listeners on South Carolina Public Radio do know, there may be some moments of silence as we wait and watch the moments unfold here on this historic day as we honor the life and legacy of the late Senator Lindsey Graham for his dedication and service to the state of South Carolina. Of course, his political start began here at the State House in 1992, and he joked about he got his first paycheck. He said that was enough. Let me get out of here. And he was part of that 1994 Republican wave there with folks like Mark Sanford, who was a congressman too. And I was watching some old programs, and there was a young James Clyburn, who we'll actually hear from today in some of the at the service later. It's just a different time, Kirk, to see those guys, those young guns back then, and to see their progression and their impact on the state of South Carolina. When we talk about impact, we talk about Lindsey Graham. Can you measure that impact? Are we going to know the ramifications of this loss?
So I think it's going to take several years before we can fully appreciate what he did for the Senate, for the state of South Carolina. But I think you kind of nailed it in that over his decades-long career in public service, he had a variety of different phases, but starting out, he very much came in as sort of a maverick that was willing to challenge the system, buck the Republican leadership, but maybe more importantly, reach across the aisle and work with his Democratic colleagues. I mean, he and Jim Clyburn ended up having a remarkable friendship that continued when Senator Graham joined the Senate in early 2000s. And then he was part of a group with John McCain that very much kind of came together, Joe Lieberman from the Democratic side, that they would come together and they would roll up their sleeves and do the hard work of governing in a very bipartisan manner. But then as things became a bit more polarized, he then sort of changed with those tunes as well.
And with that being said, Kirk, our viewers are now seeing that caisson being horse-drawn, caisson coming out here now up to the front of the north side of the State House grounds on this beautiful July day in South Carolina and Columbia. A remarkable sight to see. This is one of those services, those honors that few South Carolinians enjoy here. And it's to honor, it's to show respect for someone who really did dedicate his life to the state. I mean, we heard from folks yesterday, we heard from his niece, Emily, about how her uncle was always working. You know, he's been working his entire life. You hear his life story and raising his sister, Darlene, who's now Senator Darlene Graham. And of course, she's fulfilling that the remainder of his term, and will also be running for his seat too, which we're not going to really talk too much about today because today is about the late senator. But he's always been working, and he was foundational to that family. And I dare say you hear the stories from folks. He was foundational to politics. You heard President Donald Trump say that not many things went through the Senate without him touching them, you know? And you saw that because you saw the people that showed up yesterday at Washington National Cathedral. You had two world leaders who have active wars and conflicts going on in their countries, and they flew halfway across the world to be there, as well as some South Carolina politicians like the governor, the lieutenant governor. I saw Attorney General Alan Wilson was there too, the Republican gubernatorial nominee, Senate Majority Leader Shane Massey. And now here we are outside of the State House with this detachment here, this honor guard honoring the late senator as we await a flyover from the 169th Fighter Wing from McEntire Joint National Guard Base, a place that Senator Graham was familiar with, as he was also in the Air Force and the Air Force Reserves for some 30 years of his life too. So a special dedication there too for him. And we're waiting for this flyover that should be happening around 11 a.m. It's quite the sight to see here for our listeners on South Carolina Public Radio, reminiscent of very major moments here on the State House grounds. those impactful, historic moments, like when the Confederate flag came down back in 2015. It's not as crowded, of course, but it's still just as important, still very solemn, very important to see this moment happening. It's honor and respect. And of course, something that we saw in previous senators' funerals, like Senator Strom Thurmond, who Senator Graham placed in 2002 in that open race. He was endorsed by him. That one race that he didn't actually have any opponents in, and that was a choice there. You know, he was lucky because every other 6 years he faced a lot of opponents. But Kirk, how are you taking this moment here, what we're seeing? And
So I think, and you sort of mentioned this earlier, that Senator Graham was always working. I mean, he was known for taking flights internationally, whether it was to meet with world leaders like President Zelensky, which he was with right before he died, or to visit military bases overseas and talk to members of the armed forces. But at the same time he was doing all of this, he always made sure to make time for family. So if someone called, he would take that call, even if it meant putting a world leader on hold just for a little bit so that he could talk with his family, or even with constituents from South Carolina. He never forgot where he came from. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a remarkable aspect of his character. And that goes to speak to what we're seeing right now, this place of honor at the state capitol, what we saw yesterday in Washington, D.C. These are not things that happen often, certainly not even with politicians, regardless of how long they serve. It is a testament to the impact and influence that they've had.
Mm-hmm. And right now, for our listeners on South Carolina Public Radio, we are looking at this wonderful honor guard with the caisson with two horses pointed, standing stationary here on the north side of the State House grounds, awaiting this F-16 flyover from the 169th Fighter Wing from McEntire Joint National Guard Base, a place that the late senator knew when he was in active duty and served stateside there as a staff judge advocate, where he prepared members for deployment to the Gulf region back in the 90s. So was very active in the Air Force Reserves for some 30 years, retired as a colonel in 2015. I think he was even honored by several top brass. I mean, he was well known not just internationally, but military leaders here. Right. You know, it's fascinating to see his impact and his ability to connect with folks locally, nationally, and internationally, and make it seem like he's just talking to a neighbor.
Exactly, and I think it was his military background that sort of led to his influence in foreign affairs, because he knew the potential price that individual soldiers could pay for deployment overseas, and certainly during armed conflict. And I think that gave Senator Graham a certain credibility to speak on those matters that maybe some other senators don't have. And again, the fact that he would go out of his way to make sure he would visit with individual soldiers that were deployed overseas is just part of his testament, part of his character. And I think having the military here, having the flyover is very befitting given where Senator Graham came from.
Yeah, very well said. Of course, the upstate South Carolinian through and through, 71 years old, died 2 days after his 71st birthday on July 11th from that heart issue, unfortunately. And now we're awaiting the flyover from the F-16s from McEntire Joint National Guard Base over there in Sumter. Let's just take this moment in for our viewers. And as we await the flyover, of course, once that does occur around 11 o'clock in about a minute or so, we will see this detachment head down Main Street here in Columbia. It sounds like we have about 1 minute. Of course, the horses are getting a little antsy, of course. It's hot out here. They're probably a little hot, too. But it's going to be a remarkable sight to see. You know, we see flyovers, Inauguration Day out here. Yeah, but this will be something special, of course, for the late senator, who was in the Air Force, who did spend time at McEntire as a JAG officer, and spent time abroad as well, too, after law school. He was in the United States Air Force, 6.5 years of service and active duty as an Air Force lawyer. He was in Germany. He came back stateside, and of course, like we were talking about, was dealing with the Gulf War at that time, and being a lawyer for the Air Force.
and spent several years training other lawyers in the JAG Corps when he was part of the Air National Guard as well.
A multifaceted career, one that would be enough for one person, but it seems like for many people, like we're saying, always working. Constituent services is what he and his office are known for, and will be missed certainly. And the ability to get things done, like we said, the president yesterday was talking about that. And here we go for the Air Force flyover. Heard those F-16s from the 169th Fighter Wing from McEntire Joint National Guard Base. A fitting tribute there with that the one flyover, the missing pilot, refers to the missing man formation. Of course, a symbolic aerial salute performing during military funerals and memorial services like we have today. Just remarkable to see, Kirk.
Yeah, that gave me goosebumps just watching that. And again, I think it's important to remark on how rare something like this is, which then speaks to his influence.
And the caisson is moving on the north side of the State House grounds. The streets are shut down as it's preparing its way to head down Main Street, that horse-drawn caisson. Of course, these are members of Honor Guard, the South Carolina State Guard caisson detachment here. That's his final trip home in South Carolina. You know, Kirk, like we said, the noon service is at First Baptist Church here, not too far from where we are in the State House. A short trip down Main Street, which is lined with folks, as we can see right now, to pay their respects to the late senator. This is the closest they'll probably be able to see him. Again, like a lot of those other services we saw yesterday, there were kind of, for guests, invited guests at the Washington National Cathedral. The Rotunda was a special event, of course. But now the public, the South Carolina that Lindsey Graham knew, can see him. And we were wondering, there could be some protest. And Lindsey Graham, of course, if you're a politician, not everyone is going to like you. We know that. That's the facts of life, regardless of the day and age, regardless of party. But so far, it seems to have been very respectful. We do see in this shot right now, for our listeners, the governor is out here, as well as Senator Tim Scott. I can't tell if that's Treasury Secretary
like
Scott Besson. That's a good head of hair right there.
Yeah.
And of course, yesterday when I was in the Washington National Cathedral, you saw about half of the cabinet was there. I mean, it was remarkable to see just who showed up for him. And these folks are also making their way to First Baptist Church now too for that service. And we will be hearing from the governor and Senator Scott and former Congressman Trey Gowdy, who will be giving tributes to the late senator, as well as Congressman Jim Clyburn, who will be doing a reading. I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth or assume anything, but I feel like if you get Congressman Jim Clyburn on a pulpit and it's just for a reading, he might add some more to it. We'll see what happens. We'll be covering that live for you when that service starts at noon. Because again, it speaks to Senator Graham's bipartisan nature, Kirk. I mean, I know that's a bad word these days. Compromise is a bad word, but that's where Lindsey Graham learned the most. He learned it from Fritz Hollings, his senior senator, after Strom Thurmond left briefly in the Senate, the Democratic senator from South Carolina, as well as just working and compromising with folks like Joe Lieberman, like you said, and Senator John McCain of Arizona, who's his mentor, a Republican who ran for president, got that nomination in 2008. But of course, things change, but it's a different time now too.
Yeah, I think when Lindsey Graham first joined the Senate and met John McCain and started working across the aisle with folks like Joe Lieberman or Ted Kennedy, that very much allowed him to start developing relationships that would last through his entire career in the Senate, and helped him sort of increase the influence, the impact that he would have on that institution. And just think an example was when the Senate, through a group called the Gang of Eight, passed, not brought up for a vote in the House of Representatives, but the fact that Lindsey Graham was part of that Gang of Eight, recognizing the importance of legislation like that, and maybe more importantly, the necessity to do this in a bipartisan manner, that marked him as it marked his career early on. And then as the tide of politics and partisanship changed in the Senate, he evolved with that in order to make sure he was still central to all the conversations.
And we'll elaborate on that more too. And of course, it's complicated, but now formerly friendly relationship with the current president, Donald Trump. I want to point out too, as we watch the caisson and the procession down Main Street here in Columbia, a lot of folks are not walking with it. We see a lot of people behind us right now. They're taking buses down to First Baptist, where that service will start at noon. It's interesting to note that this is an important church because that's where we saw the late Senator Strom Thurmond have his funeral back in 2003. And when we're talking about bipartisanship and compromise, one of the people that did eulogize him that day was Senator Joe Biden, and who was also a close friend of Senator Lindsey Graham. I was watching a 2017 event that I covered down in Charleston, the renaming of the Charleston Judicial Center for Judge Wade's Waring. Instead of Fritz Hollings, he got a statue instead. He said, "I don't want my name on this building anymore. Judge Waring was so more important than I was." And it was Clyburn talking, it was Graham talking, and it was Biden talking. They were all mentioning just how funny it was to have no one ever gets their name off of a building, but Fritz Hollings was like, "No, I don't deserve this honor. Give me a statue instead." And I think it's also interesting too when we talk about naming buildings, we talk about legacies. We all thought Senator Graham was going to be around 20 more years or so like his predecessors, but he doesn't have his name on many things in South Carolina, but he might have it down there on Joint Base Charleston soon, as we've heard from reporting from the Post and Courier. So I expect we'll probably see more and more of that coming in the coming days, months, and years ahead to honor the legacy and life of Senator Graham as we keep talking about his impact that we still can't even measure yet.
I would imagine as well that we will see that, and I read the report as well about Joint Base Charleston possibly changing the name. But I think it's also, we should recognize that yesterday afternoon, after the memorials in D.C., the Senate convened and passed a new sanctions bill against Russia that was named the Lindsey Graham Russian sanctions bill, in part to honor the stance that Senator Graham took against Russia, against the invasion, in support of Ukraine. And so I think we're going to see more of this coming out, like you said, over the next several weeks and months.
Yeah, Kirk, that bill is super interesting too, because a lot of folks, it was just, again, kind of surprising, kind of awe-inspiring for me to be in the Washington National Cathedral, be up in the south balcony, and just you're looking over. You don't really have really good angles, but we did see President Zelensky right there. He was there with the Finnish president as well, who attended Furman University. He was on the golf team up there, so there's interesting connection to South Carolina. But that was Senator Graham's forte, having that ability to bring these people together. I saw Senator Richard Blumenthal, a Democrat from Connecticut, who would routinely travel with Graham on these codels across to Ukraine and be there and be that support for those guys, be that lifeline, essentially almost being the shadow secretary of state, which I'm sure Marco Rubio could appreciate the help for. He knows Senator Graham, but that was his wheelhouse, and he was doing those things and cultivating those relationships and helping back channel and again, being that Trump whisperer that we're talking about, having that ability to be close with Trump and kind of show and share his worldview, which we're now seeing play out. But of course, now he's leaving that void, and there's questions as to what this means for Ukraine, what this means for Israel and the Iran conflict, and who might fill that void, if anyone, as Republican in the Senate. So, I mean, looking ahead to that and foreign relations, any take on that, Kirk?
Yeah, I think those are going to be really big shoes to fill. And you mentioned that President Zelensky was in attendance in D.C. So was Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And again, Lindsey Graham was a staunch supporter of Israel, a fierce advocate for Israel. And to see Netanyahu there as well, I think, helps speak to the impact, the influence that Senator Graham had. But in terms of other folks that might be able to step in and fill that void, there's nobody that immediately comes to mind. I think Senator Graham, Senator McCain before him occupied a very unique space. And it's going to take a little while, I think, for someone else to try and step in and fill that void.
And of course, we really don't want to speak about the upcoming special primary that will be happening on August 11th and August 25th, but I do want to note that filing did close yesterday. On Tuesday, there are a dozen candidates, including the late Senator's sister, Darlene, who is now serving out the rest of his term, who was running for that spot, as well as some notable names like 5th District Congressman Ralph Norman, 7th District Congressman Russell Fry, the former governor, former Congressman Mark Sanford. A lot of interesting folks, and we'll be watching that in the coming days. But today is about the late Senator Lindsey Graham as we talk about his life and his legacy. We're seeing the tail end of that procession going down Main Street. We'll hopefully have another shot for you very soon as they approach First Baptist Church, where at noon we will be seeing and carrying live that entire service as they continue to honor the senator. You know, yesterday was the D.C. version, Kirk. Today is the South Carolina version. He's going to get this treatment here with some big names. And I was talking on PBS NewsHour last night, and they said, you know, what was your biggest takeaway? What struck you so much? And I said, it was solemn. It was lighthearted at times, but I really feel like Senator Graham would have preferred it to be even more lighthearted, because he had that ability, and you heard Majority Leader Thune talk about that yesterday, his ability to crack up a room, to make people laugh that he was yelling at with moments before. Vice President J.D. Vance and him didn't always see eye to eye, but he talked about that ability to break things down and make that work. And I think that was one of those lasting legacies, that soft diplomacy of Senator Lindsey Graham that we don't see as much anymore. It's my way or no way versus, hey, let's disagree, but let's just go have dinner too and try and find some middle ground here. That you don't see that as much as you used to.
Yeah, one of the remarkable things that struck me yesterday morning was when John Thune spoke at the Rotunda ceremony, both in terms of his comments about Lindsey Graham's humor and the ability just to kind of lower the temperature and have some lighthearted moments. But then also at the end, when John Thune started to choke up a little bit, got a little emotional, because he and Lindsey Graham were very close friends as well. And I think that put a human side on the Senate and maybe even just politics more generally that we don't often see. I mean, we think of politicians as butting heads, getting in arguments, throwing partisan talking points around, and we often forget that they're regular people. And I think Thune's comments kind of brought us back to the humanity that exists in that institution as well.
And we're seeing that caisson and the honor guard, as well as Richland County Sheriff Leon Lott is also behind it, leading that state guard, honor guard there down the streets of downtown Columbia on this warm July day, fully sunny day here in downtown Columbia. Warm as it always is in July, of course, but we're just glad for the weather on this beautiful day, because up in Washington yesterday it was getting a little windy, a little rainy towards the end there, but also a wonderful day to celebrate his life and legacy and that really spectacular and rare honor to see him not only in the Rotunda, but also, of course, at Washington National Cathedral for that honor. Today we are heading to First Baptist Church in downtown Columbia, where around noon we'll see that service start, and we'll be hearing from several prominent folks from South Carolina, including the governor, including Senator Tim Scott and former Congressman Trey Gowdy, as well as a reading from Democrat, the 6th District Democrat James Clyburn, and Ansley Earhart, who will do a gospel reading. Of course, we heard from Sean Hannity yesterday as well, giving a tribute, as well as the President Donald Trump, who was speaking, and Graham's niece, Emily, who was, again, I mentioned this earlier, talking about the foundation of her uncle. And it's fun to see that other side and hear those aspects, because as big as he was, you know, in raising his sister when they lost their parents so soon when he was in college. I think Darlene was 13. They lost both their parents back to back in 15 months. His father died at 68 from a heart attack, and unfortunately something that I think the late senator knew was in his cards. He would joke about being genetically term limited, and I think he knew possibly that could be his fate, and sadly it was with that aorta tear on July 11th. But I was at a campaign event in Florence at a barbecue stop, and he was joking with folks, saying, do you guys want some Lipitor? He's talking about his cholesterol lowering drug. So, you know, a lot of people have those ailments, and of course in South Carolina, the noon. But it was funny because Trump was, you were just talking about that, Kirk, how he gave out his cell phone, and then Lindsey did a whole campaign ad against that. But he said, I blew up his phone then, and then he blew up my phone for the next 10 years. And that's true. I mean, they were always talking. We'd be in press conferences.
Playing golf.
Like, we'd be in a press conference, and he answers the phone. He's like, I got to take this. It's the president. It's just, you know, they were always talking about things. And he was able to shift things and bring the president around to his different views. Again, like we were talking about Ukraine and trying to get support for Ukraine, and now, of course, with what's going on in Iran, we see his influence there as well with Israel. So wanted to be at the table, not on the menu, as we keep saying.
Correct. And I think if nothing else, he had a remarkable intuition to figure out what he needed to do in order to make sure he was part of that discussion. He was in that room, in the room where it happened.
Yeah.
He was always part of those conversations.
And Kirk, we were talking about Senator Graham's, let's call it evolution politically, of course. Reality is what it is as well in politics. Just how things changed not only after 2016, 2017, and that in the Senate, but also, of course, I want to just break here from him because we do see the honor guard about to take the casket off the caisson there at First Baptist Church, that military honor guard. Of course, the senator was a military veteran, serving in the Air Force for more than 30 years in different regards and aspects and positions, including 6 years in active duty. And it was just the Kavanaugh hearings, Brett Kavanaugh in 2018, that really solidified it for folks and the president, I think, to show his bona fides that, no, I'm all in on this. Of course, one of his biggest lasting policies domestically will be judicial confirmations, getting judges through that process. We're talking about Kavanaugh in 2018 and how difficult that was. It was a close 50-48 vote, and of course he had a fiery moment there in that committee hearing that really changed a lot of people's views for him, but it was a process that he held dear and he didn't like the way it was going, and that really upped his stock for a lot of folks and the president.
And I think it also goes to show how Lindsey Graham would sort of buck convention when he thought it was necessary, because during the Kavanaugh hearing, there were established rules that Democrats and Republicans had agreed to in terms of who was going to question. It was supposed to be a neutral third party, and she was going to do all of those questions. And Lindsey Graham recognized that Kavanaugh, that nomination was starting to tank. And so he bucked that convention and came in and delivered very passionate, very sharp words, and I think that saved Kavanaugh's nomination.
It was a very difficult vote there in 2018. And of course, right now, for our listeners on South Carolina Public Radio, we're watching this military armed forces pallbearer team. They just took the casket off of the caisson. They're about to escort him to First Baptist Church. It's a very touchy moment here if you can watch this. for our listeners and our viewers watching and listening to our live broadcast coverage here of the late Senator Lindsey Graham's funeral service. We just saw a military armed forces pallbearer team escort the casket of the remains of the late senator into First Baptist Church here in downtown Columbia in a beautiful, solemn moment as his family follows behind him as they enter the church here for this ceremony that's supposed to start at noon. It's a little bit after 11:20 a.m. right now, so don't know if that service will start earlier or not, but again, it's set to start at noon. That was a very touching moments that we've seen played out over these past days, past hours. We saw that at the Capitol with his casket being carried up the steps there too, and outside of the Washington National Cathedral. This military honor, again, honoring his time in service as well as his time in service, public service to the country, starting in 1994, 3rd Congressional District, part of that wave of Republicans there, Kirk, and he carried that on through. He got in and didn't let go. He kept on serving, and more than 30 years. Long legacy there for Senator Lindsey Graham.
Yeah, and we had mentioned how yesterday in Washington, D.C., that was an opportunity for the country to remember Senator Graham, and today is now the opportunity for South Carolina to remember him. And I think that's another good aspect of his legacy is the fact that he always looked out for his constituents. He always looked out for the people of South Carolina. And I actually remember I have a personal story. In 2011, I took a group of about a dozen undergraduate students up to D.C. over spring break, and we met with various folks. But when it got to the Capitol, Senator Graham came out and met with us for about 15, 20 minutes during a time when Benjamin Netanyahu was in D.C. for the first time after he had been elected prime minister. Senator Graham said, you know, I'm going to step away from meeting this new prime minister to talk to a dozen undergraduate students from USC. And I think that's a really good story that showcases how he never forgot where he came from.
Yeah, because, you know, he could make up an excuse. He could say, I'm busy, there's a lot going on, but he knew the power of that constituent services and touching those hands and seeing those faces and taking those photos. Likewise, I was up in Washington last October. The government shutdown was going on. We had all these interviews lined up, ready to talk to members of our delegation. Of course, the House delegation was home because nothing was getting done. It was on the Senate. And we had a request in with the senator, and we said, hey, you're our only shot right now. Can you fill 30 minutes of our show? Took time away, and he sat down with us, and he made that show work. We talked about a wide range of topics, and that was his ability. He understood the power of the press. He understood the power of, talking to the media. Of course, he was always on the Sunday shows to the detriment of some of his, pastors. He would talk about he was always on the air in studio instead of being in the pews. But of course, that was how he saw his ability to get things done and to talk to those folks. And sadly, I was up there. I got into Washington last Tuesday. And I wanted to go around and see things and get some bearings. And you're walking through the Russell Senate office building. And I'd been in his office last October. Then when you round the corner, all of a sudden you're just hit by a wall of flowers. And you smell the flowers and you immediately think, oh, that's wonderful. But then you immediately become sad because you realize what that's for. And it's because there were so many flowers in his office for so many people that had sent them to dedicate and remember and memorialize this man. And of course, his staff is still working too. They're working through this. They lost their boss. There's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot going on in the state. And then to have to work through and to plan and to do all this today for these massive, important ceremonies that have gone off without a hitch, as far as I can tell, at least in Washington and today here in South Carolina, as we stand by for that noon service at First Baptist Church, where the senator's remains have just been transported to. And you can see that live shot now with inside the church. They're at First Baptist, and we're going to be waiting to see folks get in there, get organized. Again, it's supposed to be around noon. It's about 11:30 right now. We're here in downtown Columbia outside the State House with USC political science professor Kirk Randazzo as we look at the life and legacy of the late Senator Lindsey Graham, who died at 71 on July 11th, 2 days after turning 71. And as he was in the middle of a campaign for his 5th term in office, now, of course, we don't want to talk about the future of that because we know we'll be talking about that in the days and weeks to come, of course, because today is about the late senator's day 2 of his moments in recognizing and remembering him and his service to the state. And kind of going back to this as we wait to see what happens here, Kirk, and these ceremonies to start off, I wonder what we're going to hear from the governor. Of course, they've had a working relationship too. I want to say I was down in Beaufort County last November they brought Lindsey in to talk and introduce the governor because he was getting an award because he's the longest serving governor. They've been together all through this. And, you know, it was just funny to see them kind of cut up and joke because they are probably two of the funniest politicians in South Carolina. Governor McMaster always has a good joke, always a story. Even if he's repeated it before, it always hits, it always lands. And same with Senator Graham. You heard that yesterday from folks talking in the Rotunda as well as the National Cathedral. So what do you think we'll be hearing today? Of course, different tone from Washington, but still honoring the late senator. Yeah,
I would expect that today we're going to get a bit more of who Lindsey Graham was as an individual. There will still be some stories about him as a senator, as a member of the House, his impact on South Carolina. But I expect that we'll get a bit more of who Lindsey Graham was, excuse me, as a person, because the individuals, as you said, that are lined up to speak had a very deep personal relationship with Senator Graham that existed over decades. And so, you know, I can only imagine if I was in that position, which among numerous stories might I tell in a moment like this? How would I best represent or remember my friend? And so I think we're going to get a lot of personal moments from everybody who is slated to speak.
And it'll be interesting to hear from Trey Gowdy and Senator Tim Scott, of course, really good friends there. And, you know, just looking at, you know, Senator Tim Scott got into the Senate in 2013, working with the senator since then. Now he is the senior senator, so he'll be taking over the reins there, more responsibilities, of course, with that experience and that tenure. I'm interested to hear those stories because I was also in D.C. last week. It just happened to be the 16th annual Senator Tim Scott prayer breakfast they do every year. It was moved up to July this year, and of course, sadly, it became a you know, commemoration of the life of Senator Graham. And we heard from several members of the delegation, including Sherry Biggs, Russell Fry, Ralph Norman, Joe Wilson, other folks as well as Tim Scott, and William Timmons up there too. He was actually, I didn't really quite know that 4th District Congressman William Timmons and Senator Graham were so close. He went on several CODELs, those international trips with him, and even talked about how one time during golf, it was kind of a funny story about how Senator Graham got a par 2, he shot a 2 on a par 5. I'm not much of a golfer, but I know that is quite rare. Of course, the hole-in-one on a par 3 is what you're looking for, but you know, shooting a 2 on a par 5 is quite insane too. And he said, yeah, I was there to witness it. I believe it. Like, you know, it's good to have that camaraderie there. And of course, he was always golfing with the president too. And Timmons and Graham were always golfing together as well. And so just finding folks in that delegation and learning and kind of talking about shared experiences and shared understandings and the shared love of South Carolina.
Sure. Well, you had mentioned Tim Scott, and I think that's a wonderful example of the mentoring that Lindsey Graham had done for several people. Just like Fritz Hollings took Lindsey under his wing when he stepped into the Senate to replace Strom Thurmond, Lindsey did the same thing with Tim Scott when he stepped in to replace Jim DeMint when he left to join the Heritage Foundation. And I think that mentorship allowed Tim Scott to start developing his own set of relationships and get to a point where he is starting to exercise more and more influence on the Senate as an institution. And now he's going to have an opportunity to mentor whoever gets the permanent seat after the November election. I would imagine he's doing that with Darlene Graham right now as she holds this temporarily. But Tim Scott now is the senior senator, as you mentioned, and he has that opportunity to sort of walk in the same footsteps as his friend. And it'll be very curious to see if he brings that into any of his remarks at First Baptist later on.
Yeah, and also just thinking back to the power of our delegation too. Of course, Senator Graham was over the Senate Budget Committee, so he worked on getting reconciliation done for that one big beautiful bill last year. And we haven't actually talked too much about earmarks and his ability to do that to his detriment to an extent, right? Because Republicans were always against bringing the money back and fighting against earmarks and big spending. We got to cut spending. We got to stop with these pet projects. But some of those pet projects were making sure that the Savannah River site, the national lab down there, was continuing on after what we saw with the failure of the mixed oxide fuel fabrication facility too. That's where they were taking weapons grade, I believe it was plutonium, to repurpose it into reactor fuel. It might have been uranium. I can't get it quite straight there, but that was a deal that we had with Russia, and then that failed, and then it was like, what do we do with SRS? And now they're doing plutonium pit production. That's a Senator Lindsey Graham directive right there. You see his hands all over those defense spending bills and bringing back money for Joint Base Charleston, which we were just talking about how it could be renamed after Senator Graham. You know, there's so many military institutions in this state. We're such a military-friendly state. You have Parris Island, you have Fort Jackson here in Columbia. So many different things. You have Marine Corps Air Station Beaufort with the F-35s down there. And like we just saw with McIntyre Joint Air National Guard Base with the 169th wing right there. And of course, at Shaw Air Force Base too, you have Air Force CENTCOM right there, which is playing a huge role right now with what's going on. And I didn't have a chance to mention about the F-16s, but another story with Senator Graham, we know that the F-16s from Lockheed Martin are now being produced in Greenville. That move happened in 2019 after a move from Texas, Fort Worth, Texas, because Lockheed was going to produce the F-35 down in Texas. They needed a home for the F-16. Well, guess what? How do you think that got there, Kirk? You know?
Well, and I think that also goes to show how Lindsey Graham did a lot of this stuff behind the scenes in ways that people just don't recognize. So everything that you mentioned, it's also important to remember that when he was a member of the House, that's when the military had a huge downsizing in the mid-90s. And there was very real concerns that several bases across South Carolina might close, including Fort Jackson. And Lindsey Graham worked very, very hard behind the scenes to minimize the impact of those cuts to bases in South Carolina. And I think that's one of the reasons that he became sort of the leading candidate to replace Strom Thurmond in the Senate, was the fact that he was very willing to do what was necessary, even if it was out of the spotlight, behind the scenes, not, you know, in a glamorous kind of way, but he was very willing to do what was necessary to protect the state of South Carolina and the people that live here.
Yeah, and then with that, of course, the economic impact that comes with it. Like we're talking about Lockheed in the upstate making these F-16s, and I was there in 2023 when they had the first delivery to the Kingdom of Bahrain, which of course is an ally out there in the Middle East. And of course, that's happening right now, very active, very hot zone right now. We saw that playing out earlier this year with the Iran war happening out there, and those F-16s in action out there. And he, of course, wanted the F-16s going to Ukraine as well, saying some of the allies could take their older F-16s, train those Ukraine pilots up, and use those in their war against Russia, and then backfill with new ones being produced in Greenville. I mean, just one aspect of what we're seeing. And of course, then you go down to North Charleston with Boeing.
I was just going to mention Boeing, right? The movement into South Carolina, the expansion. You know, Lindsey Graham has his fingerprints all over that, or even, you know, the BMW and the other automotive makers coming into Spartanburg and the upstate. I mean, these are also things where Graham had an influence, and again, wasn't out in front, so you wouldn't recognize him as the point person that closed the deal. But without his influence, that deal does not come together the way it does. And South Carolina economically has absolutely prospered because of those kinds of arrangements.
Yeah, and it reminds me, as we're in the Low Country talking about down there in North Charleston, the Charleston Harbor deepening project of 52 feet. That took years, and he finally got it done. I think it was in December 2022, December 2023, don't hold me to it. But he was there with then Ports Authority CEO Barbara Melvin with the final call to that dredge ship saying, like, you know, go ahead and get the last dredge of that harbor up, make it 52 feet, the deepest on the East Coast. And he mentioned those remarks very candidly, how that project almost failed 3 times. Like, it is not easy to do these major national projects, especially when you have to go through permitting, the Corps of Engineers, and securing that funding, the hundreds of millions of dollars of funding.
That, and at the same time that the port in Savannah is deepening and expanding, so it would have been very easy to say, you know what, we don't need Charleston to be any deeper. We can just move all that cargo into Savannah. And Lindsey Graham absolutely said, no, we want to preserve what Charleston's able to contribute.
And again, just a testament to his life and legacy there, the economic development front, and of course bringing money back. And he said that was always to his detriment. It was always him and Clyburn doing that. Now it's just going to be Congressman Jim Clyburn there doing that. And most recently, a groundbreaking in June, I believe it was in June, for the I-95 bridge over Lake Marion. This is an aging bridge. We're talking about bridges in our state. Everyone's always talking about roads and infrastructure, and you don't want to have a failure on a major critical piece of infrastructure like that bridge over Lake Marion. And so they got $175 million in grants from DOT to fix that bridge, and that's bipartisanship, getting things done. Graham was one of the few Republicans to vote for that. I think it was 2021, the bipartisan infrastructure law. Right. Again, bringing the money home, because everyone likes to talk about doing something about roads and bridges and fixing that infrastructure, but actually when you have to vote for it, that's a completely different thing. You put your neck on the line there politically, and he was always willing to do that.
Well, and that bill is very important because many of the folks in the Republican delegation voted against that, especially in the House. And Lindsey Graham was one of the few that sort of voted across the aisle, joined his Democratic colleagues to pass that, knowing that it was going to be a win for Joe Biden, but at the same time recognizing this is money that's going to come back into South Carolina and is only going to benefit the people of this state. And so Lindsey Graham very much was willing to, again, roll up his sleeves and kind of do the not so glamorous work to govern in order to make sure that things still worked.
And Kirk, we're about 20 minutes away from the service happening at First Baptist Church. The late senator's remains have arrived there. Folks are assembling there. We're going to see that program start at noon. And as we spend some more time talking about the late senator, there's plenty of time to talk. There's so much to talk about him. You know, I've been when this news broke, I was talking to a colleague, Reagan Knight, on South Carolina Public Radio. I was abroad at the time, and you're just like, how can I summarize so much? And for the South Carolina Lead podcast that I do twice a week, luckily I could search through all my old scripts and see just how many times I mentioned Senator Graham. I think a lot of our listeners are always kind of, you know, begrudging that fact that he was always on, because he was always doing something. He was always making news. Fox News' Sean Hannity said yesterday in his eulogy that Graham was good for ratings, and he was also a really good communicator in trying to explain things. But of course, that still did get lost in some of his constituents, some of the base, especially after, you know, his stances after January 6th. We saw him having a bit of a come to Jesus with President Donald Trump there. But again, leaning in, working to get the president elected. I mean, I remember January 2023, it was the senator was here, as well as the governor and other folks in the congressional delegation with President Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump at that time, as he kicked off that executive team push for South Carolina to begin his re-election campaign for 2024, which Senator Graham was a huge cheerleader for. He was on every Sunday show pretty much every week talking, really being that communicator for the president, a disciplined communicator versus we know that Trump likes to communicate his own way, but Graham was always trying to thread that needle for him.
Yeah, and I think it's also, I mean, the times that you just mentioned, it's also important to recognize that when Joe Biden was president, Senator Graham and Joe Biden had a very good personal relationship. And I think an example where that played out was in the Supreme Court vacancy that ultimately gets Ketanji Brown Jackson onto the court. Senator Graham was championing Michelle Childs, who was a district court judge at the time from USC's law school, and the message was the Supreme Court has never had a justice from a state flagship institution. And that kind of diversity, this is maybe back when diversity wasn't such a partisan word, but that kind of diversity was really important. So now Michelle Childs is on the short list of 3 to be considered for the Supreme Court. And even though she doesn't ultimately get onto that bench. She's now on the appeals court for the D.C. Circuit, which is arguably the second most important court in the United States. And this was all because of Lindsey Graham working behind the scenes with Democrats, and especially with Joe Biden's team, to make sure a South Carolinian is put in a position of prominence.
Yeah, really setting the stage for Judge Michelle Childs, too. I remember that was very busy 2022, and then she got up there in the summer of 2022, and that's where she's serving right now. Again, could be on the short list for another Democratic presidential appointment when it comes to the Supreme Court vacancies. But yes, having that ability to talk to a Democratic president, yeah, some people are going to say, what are you doing? Why would you do that? You're a Republican. You shouldn't be doing that. He saw the value, and again, going back to what he was always trying to do and advance South Carolina's interests regardless of partisanship. And that was something that you just don't see. We're not seen as much anymore.
Exactly. And if nothing else, I think that if I was to sum up Lindsey Graham's career in maybe a single sentence, it would be he always wanted to be part of the conversation. And whether that meant reaching across the aisle when bipartisanship was important, or becoming a bit more MAGA when they started taking over the Republican Party, he did what was necessary to be part of that conversation.
And kind of keeping with 2023, as we await the service there at First Baptist Church in downtown Columbia, it's supposed to start at noon. We got about 20 minutes until that starts, and of course things are falling into place, it seems like, on time, which is always remarkable in such complicated logistical challenges as this today. Of course, we had that flyover earlier today, that beautiful flyover and the procession down Main Street. And this is, of course, capping 2 days of celebrations of the life of the late Senator Lindsey Graham. Of course, with Washington yesterday in those services, and now today here in Columbia before a private burial in the upstate following this service. But going back to 2023, I was talking earlier today with some folks about some other clips that Graham is also sadly known for when he got booed in Pickens County, right, nearby his home county in July 2023. I was there. It was July 4th weekend. It was very hot. It's hotter today, as you would expect. But there were thousands of folks out there, and folks were speaking before the president arrived. Former president at the time arrived. You had the governor, you had the lieutenant governor, and then you had Lindsey, and the reception was not that warm. It was sustained boos, and it's hard to say how many people were, of course, from South Carolina, but of course, even then, there's some folks that do not like him. We saw that play out, of course, in primaries and since then. But he knows that, and he had to try and talk around that. It was difficult, and I think you see that up close and personal, and he's just so used to being in these places where people are supportive of him and doing all this work, and then you're still getting booed, even though it must have been kind of confounding to him to have to deal with that and be like, I'm doing so much for you, why am I still being booed? And it's because people have their beliefs and that's what they stand by. Or one thing that he did, like voting for Democratic appointed judges when you shouldn't be doing that, but he always said they're qualified. He didn't do it for Ketanji Brown Jackson because he had issues with her. And of course that was post Kavanaugh, but he did what he thought was right, even if it meant people booing him sustained for minutes on end. And then of course you had the former president get up there and say, hey, he's not that bad. I mean, he was always running that offense, I guess that defense for Lindsey there too, and have always endorsed him too because he saw that value in Senator Graham, as well as a good golfing buddy, as we should say too.
Well, and I think that's one of the, again, another thing that I think Lindsey Graham was able to do was endure all of those challenges and still come out in a remarkable place of impact and influence. You know, you mentioned getting booed in the crowd. We need to recognize that this also comes on the heels of the 2020 election when he last ran, and there was a relatively big primary challenge that he had to overcome, and then in the general election is running against Jamie Harrison.
Yes.
And millions of dollars poured into that race to try and unseat Graham from that position. And ultimately, he wins that election by a very comfortable margin. I mean, a double-digit margin when everybody expected that Harrison might be able to flip that seat. So I think it goes to show maybe a certain resilience that Lindsey Graham possessed, where no matter the challenge in front of him, he always found a way.
And Kirk, to that point, and I know we don't want to talk too politically because we're talking about his legacy, but hey, that's also part of his legacy. He just got that Republican nomination in June, outright, crowded field like it's always been for him ever since he ran in 2002 when he got to get it pretty much easily. Then everyone else started challenging him from his right. He was poised to win a 5th term this November. Of course, he's going up against Dr. Annie Andrews, who's a Democrat, as well as a member from the Libertarian and the Constitution Party. But you're talking about Jamie Harrison. I remember covering that race and that debate and talking about $130, $140 million from Harrison, who went on to become DNC chairman. And these close polls that were showing them neck and neck, and everyone's like, what's going on? And then he wins comfortably by 10 points because it's still South Carolina. It's not Georgia. It's not North Carolina. We are not a purple state. So in that regard, and looking toward the future of this seat, Kirk, what do you say to folks, too, who are maybe wondering how this could all shake out in November? Whoever gets the Republican nomination on August 11th or August 25th in the runoff, is it going to be close? Is it going to still be Republican? How do you see this shaping up?
I think that's a fascinating question, and to sort of add to the complexity of this, I think we need to recognize that for decades, turnover in these seats just did not happen.
No.
Right? Strom Thurmond has this seat for 50 years. Fritz Hollings, the Democrat, has his seat for decades. So it's not even a partisan thing. South Carolina just does not like turnover. They like to return their folks to the institutions. And so given the hyper-partisanship that we're in now, one has to wonder, is this a turning point in South Carolina politics? Will we expect to see maybe more turnover moving forward? Whether or not a Democrat takes that office, and I think that's going to be a very difficult prospect, just given the Republican dominance in this state. But even if the Republican candidate, whoever that nominee is, if they win in November, it's not clear to me if South Carolina is going to be as willing to return them to the Senate like they were for Lindsey Graham, for Fritz Hollings, for Strom Thurmond, even for Tim Scott right now. So that's going to be pretty fascinating to watch over the next several years.
Yeah, of course, we're still waiting for this this funeral service to begin here at First Baptist Church. Well, we will be hearing from Senator Tim Scott. We'll be hearing from Governor Henry McMaster, as well as former Congressman Trey Gowdy, as they pay tribute to their friend and lifelong servant of South Carolina, Lindsey Graham. Just remarkable to be witnessing. Again, life is short, life is fleeting. We never know when our time is, but we thought that Graham probably had more time left in him, because you're talking about the Strom Thurmonds, you're talking about the Fritz Hollings. But Strom was 100. I think Fritz was pushing 97, perhaps. And I think I mentioned earlier, Senator Graham would joke that he's genetically term limited. He's like, I don't think I'm going to be Strom Thurmond. And sadly, at 71, he proved that to be true because of his heart condition, similar to what his father had there. So he did as much as he could do in the time he did it. And President Trump said as much yesterday that he went out at the peak of his game. And he truly was. When I was talking to him last October, when he gave me 30 minutes of his time, an incredible amount of time for such a busy man, he said, I'm the best I've been. I feel healthy. I think I can do it. I'm ready to go. I'm doing everything I can do as best as I can. So there's no reason why I shouldn't go. And of course, we all know that the ultimate, litmus test for someone is the voters. And if they don't want you there, they'll vote you out. And so far, they had been returning him, and he was set to get a 5th term in November.
Yeah, but even with that, you think of the 100 people that are in the Senate. There's only a handful that you would call movers and shakers in that institution. And so, I think back to, say, Republicans like a John McCain or an Arlen Specter from Pennsylvania, or Democrats like a Ted Kennedy. Lindsey Graham is now in that same camp. And the memorial services yesterday and today, I think, pay tribute to the fact that he is one of those rare individuals that had a tremendously profound impact on the institution. You know, a Robert Byrd from West Virginia, kind of the same way. There's relatively small number of people that have fundamentally affected the institution like Lindsey Graham and those others have done. And again, regardless of who wins in November, it is going to take years for someone else to fill that role, whether it's from South Carolina or from some other state. But it is going to take years for someone else to fill Lindsey Graham's shoes.
Yeah, we did hear from Majority Leader Senator John Thune in the rotunda yesterday, who called Graham a towering figure in the Senate and on the international stage for his leadership on national security, and also talked about how no one was more capable of cracking up a room, and his conversations help advance discussions and bridge gaps. He was also honored by fellow South Carolina Congresswoman Sherry Biggs from the 3rd Congressional District, his old seat there, and he, his quick wit and his strong team that helped South Carolinians. And Vice President J.D. Vance, who also echoed similar sentiments, talking about that you could disagree with him, but you could still respect each other, and that was a defining characteristic of Graham that we were talking about, not so present these days. And then, of course, we heard from President Donald Trump yesterday at Washington National Cathedral, who spoke for about 15 minutes and called Graham an original. And I think that's what you were just kind of talking to there, Kirk, about that ability and taking out the peak of his game. Called him one of the great